Morning, everyone. Hey, it's great to see you. If you're a guest this morning, we're glad that you're here to worship alongside us. Hey, last week we kicked off this new series called Why Do You Do That? And the whole premise of the series is recognizing that even in this room, that there are 5 different generations represented in the church right now. 5 different generations, and all the generations, we see things differently, we understand church differently, we focus on different things, but in order for the message and the mission of Jesus to be brought to the world, the generations have to work together. Like, we have to figure this out. And so the idea behind this series is asking some in the older generations of Crossroads why they do certain things that they do. That based on statistics and our understanding, maybe in younger generations, seem odd. Maybe seem different. Last week, we kind of just laid the foundation, looking at Titus chapter 2. In the beginning part of Titus chapter 2, Paul is writing this letter to this guy named Titus, his younger church leader, and he's facing lots of difficulty, and he is challenged to kind of lead those who are older than him, to challenge older men and older women and younger women. And recognizing that each different generation that he is writing about has different responsibilities. And really, when you look at all the different generations, it can be easy to pick something apart, right? It can be easy to pick something apart of someone that's in a younger generation than you or someone that's in an older generation than you. But really where we landed together is that we need to see value in people. And that when we see value in people, it brings value to the gospel for those around us. And so whether they're from a different generation or whether they communicate different or whether they worship different or whatever the case may be, there is value in one another. And that we as Jesus people are called to see that value in each other. So today, what's the question that we're asking? The question that we're asking this week that I've asked some in the older generations of Crossroads is this. Why do you come to church every week? And every is emphasized. Why do you come to church every week? Now, I'm going to pray and then we'll jump in. God, I'm so thankful this morning for a church. I'm thankful that, God, we can be here together. And God, I know that some of us in the room that we've had busy weeks and some of us have had challenging weeks. God, some of us have had weeks where we've been drawn closer to you. Father, we're all over the board, but we're here all together right now. And so I pray that in these few moments, God, that you will remind us of the truth of your word. God, I pray that your spirit is present and moving and alive. God, I pray that we are the church that you need us to be and that we need from one another. Jesus, I'm thankful that because of what you did on a cross, that we can meet here this morning. Every one of us is flawed and every one of us is people that have committed sin this past week. But God, we can meet here with the hope of heaven because of the forgiveness that you offer. It's in your name we pray. Amen. I'm not a huge number guy. I never really have been. But there are some times where I find statistics interesting. Statistics at times, they can paint a picture. They can lay the groundwork, if you will. They can give you the landscape of what it is that you're moving into. This past week, I did a little bit of research on some statistics that talk about the church. In 1990, 20.4% of Americans went to church and considered themselves Christian. In 2004, that number dropped to 18%. In 2014, it dropped to 16%. And the way that the projections are working, if everything continues the way that it is, in 2050, there will only be 11% of Americans that go to church or consider themselves Christian. When you look at how often we go to church, okay, the average, and I say average, some of us are more, some of us are less, the average number of times per month that the average Christian family attends church has dropped to 1.7 times a month. 20 years ago, that number was between 2 and 3 weeks per month. And I know, immediately hearing that statistic, we think to ourselves, well, that's not us. Like, there's some of us in the room, we're 4 for 4 every month, even on the 5 Sunday months, we're there at 5, like, we're here every single weekend. So we think, you know what, That is not us. I mean, I see everybody around me every single week. I was having a conversation with a group from Crossroads just this past week, and that was kind of their thought. Like, that can't be Crossroads, right? Here's the thing. On an average Sunday here at Crossroads, with all of our kids and all of us over 3 services, typically, depending on season, but on average, there's an average of 550 people here every week. Now, every week, we have some attendance books to make sure that, we're here and we're kind of keeping track of that. If you add up all of the number of people in those books and all of the families represented, it's over 900 people. Which means that over the course of the last 3 months, that more than 900 people, we have the expectation that are going to be here every week. But yet our average is 550. And so before we say, well, that's not us, it is. It is, and there's lots of different reasons that we could contribute to, the cause of this. We could say, well, we as a culture, we've been consumed by comfort. If we can get everything that church offers, supposedly, if we can get the sermon online and we can pick out the songs that we want to listen to online and worship online, and we can do all of that, then that's way more comfortable than getting out of my pajamas and putting makeup on and getting dressed and getting the kids out the door and all of those type things. And so I can just get it at home. It's much more comfortable. Maybe you're an introvert personality and just walking into the lobby at church is uncomfortable. And so if we can get it at home, that is much more comfortable than coming here. Maybe it's this overrun of busyness. Maybe we look at our schedules now and we say, I'm busy all the time. Sunday morning's the only time I have to sleep in. It's the only time I have with my kids. I'm just overrun with busyness. We're always on the go. Sunday mornings used to be somewhat protected in schedules across the board, and that is now a thing of the past. And we're traveling and we're going and we're doing every club meeting even on Sunday mornings. And so maybe some of us would say we're overrun with busyness. Maybe some of us would say, well, probably it's because we're more connected than ever, but we have less community than ever. We're more connected because of the growth of technology. We're more connected across the board. But yet when it comes to interaction with one another, that is becoming less and less. And maybe before we even try to figure out the reason for the decline, maybe your first thought is, well, Matt, you don't have to come to church every week to be a Christian. And here's the thing. I would agree with you on the premise of that statement. You don't. But there is a loss of Christian community when we don't. So maybe it's not that we don't have to come. Maybe it's, why should we come? Like, what's the reason for it? I asked some of our senior adults this past week, well, why do you come to church every single week? And of course their answers contained wisdom. Someone said, and I told them I would keep their names out, someone said that it's a rejuvenation of my soul to fight the battles each week. Someone said the energy in worship gets me through each and every day. Someone said the encouragement for one another. And then someone else said this. They said to be fed spiritually. And I want to hang out on that one for just a minute and ask this question. If our time with one another, I'm not going to use the word attendance, but if our time with one another is considered our spiritual mealtime, how many of us are starving? If our time with one another as the church, if that is our mealtime, how many of us are just getting enough to get by? And how many of us are just warming up leftovers online to satisfy the hunger? Don't get me wrong, friends. I think that online church and technology has incredible benefits, but it can't be the only thing. If our time together with one another in Christian community, if it is our mealtime to be fed spiritually, how hungry are we? The writer of the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, in just a few quick verses this morning, He serves up this three-course meal of why this time. And I know right now I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you're here, right? But why this time with one another is so vital, is so important. If you brought a Bible, go ahead and open up to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. It'll be on the screen. You're also welcome to look it up on your phone or your app. Hebrews chapter 10, we're going to begin reading in verse 19. It says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened up to us through the curtain that is his body. And since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we professed, for he who promised is faithful." I want to pause. Okay? These verses right here explain the why. Well, let me explain it this way. This letter is being written to a bunch of early Jewish Christians, which means they're Jewish people by descent, but they're followers of Jesus based off of their religion. They're followers of Jesus, however, they still have families from Jewish descent and Jewish religion. They're the people that they were used to spending time with. They're Jewish people and held to all of the rules of Judaism. And so all of their families and all of the people that they normally had surrounded themselves with are trying to talk these early Jewish Christians into coming back to being Jewish. And saying, listen, it's easier just to follow the rules, and it's easier, to know what it looks like and where God resides. All of these things that Jewish people believe and hold fast to. All of these rules. It's easier to do that than to trust in a God that you can't see. It's easier to do that than to pray to a God that you can't see. And so they're facing persecution. They're facing all of this tension to come back, to leave Jesus. And so the writer of Hebrews, if we were to sum up the whole book of Hebrews in one sentence, it's Jesus is better. Okay? Jesus is better. Jesus is better than all of these rules and all of these different things, hoops that you had to jump through. Jesus is better. And so as he begins this part, he says, listen, because we have Jesus, because Jesus meets us here, because of what Jesus did on a cross, we have this new way of living. Because we have Jesus, we have this assurance that he comes near to us. Like he broke down this divide with his body on the cross, and so now he is present with us. This is different than what they knew as Jewish followers. Jesus made this way, and his way is better. And because of Jesus, here comes the three-course meal for why we meet in community with one another. Verse 24, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on in love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So they're facing all this tension to leave, facing all this tension to move away from trusting Jesus and holding on to Jesus. And the writer of Hebrews says, no, wait a minute. You got to persevere because of Jesus, and this is how you get through it. As a church, as a community of Jesus people, this is how the first thing that he writes, the first part of the meal, if you will, is to spur one another on in love and good deeds. Spur one another on in love and good deeds. This word spur, it can also mean stir. It's this action. It literally means to agitate or move forward. And so you and I, when we meet together, we're not just supposed to agitate each other. Hear the whole part of what I'm saying. We're supposed to encourage and agitate, move one another's actions in love and good deeds. You see, here's what happens a lot of times. If we get stuck in this mentality of I don't need to be at church. Okay, there's two relationships. When you look at Jesus, there are two relationships that are vital in Jesus' life. There's this relationship of me, that's us, or Jesus, okay, with He, our Father in heaven, God. Okay, this relationship is vital. We see this different times in the Gospels where Jesus, it says, Jesus found a quiet place to pray, to spend time with his Father in heaven. You see this periodically. This relationship is crucial. But there's another aspect of it. When the writer of Hebrews says to spur one another on in love and good deeds, it's a love of God. But there's also a me and we relationship, a horizontal relationship. I mean, when you look at Jesus, what is the first thing that he does to start his ministry? He goes and finds other people. Hey, come and follow me. Come spend time with me. And so while this relationship is extremely important, when the writer of Hebrews says, why is it that we meet together? The first course is we desire this, but we also need this. Love and good deeds. Love of God, love of one another. Serving him, good deeds for him with one another. And what happens is when we begin to erase this line, and we say, well, I've got my Bible, and, I go hiking and I find God in nature, and that's my church. Or, I go to the ball field and that's my church. Or, whatever it is, and we just say, you know what, I listen to the sermon online, and that makes me a Christian. Listen, you're right, okay? But here's what happens. When we don't have this horizontal relationship agitating us, keeping us accountable, encouraging us to action, saying, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, or hey, why don't you come serve alongside me? This is a need. Hey, why don't you come with me? When we don't have that, it becomes a little bit easier for this relationship to become fractured. Because it's a whole lot easier to hide something when no one else is around, isn't it? It's a whole lot easier not to tell the truth when no one else is around. And so when we distance ourselves from the we, all of a sudden the me and he slowly becomes fractured. Because if no one else is asking us, how's your relationship with Jesus? If no one else is asking us, what's something that you've learned this past week? If no one else is caring about our spiritual walk, then you know who cares about it the most? Satan. And so, to spur one another on in love and good deeds, there are two relationships that matter. There's a relationship with us and God, and there's this relationship with one another, and both of them are vital. The writer continues to write, he says, not giving up meeting together as some have done. Even back when the Bible was written, there's this understanding of sometimes it's easier to not show up. Like, sometimes it is easier to sleep in. Sometimes it's easier to not battle the kids into the car. Sometimes it's easier to not show up. Sometimes it's easier to find other things to do. But course number 2 of this feast, of this meal, is of our community. Why is it that we do what we do each and every week? Because we need one another. We need one another. You see, there's this recognition that together is always better. It doesn't mean it's easier, but it's always better. When you have someone to lean on, when you have someone to hear advice from, when you have someone to trust, when you have someone who's going through the same battles as you. Friends, this is something that we can't find online. Craig Groeschel, he's a Christian preacher down in Oklahoma. He preaches at Life Church. They have online campuses all over the world. If you have the YouVersion Bible app on your phone, their church started that, created that. Very much a proponent of online ministry, but here's what he said. There is something better. To worship God together, to be committed to worship to Him together, to hear His word together. Do not reduce church to listening to a podcast. It's so much more than that. It's community. It's worshiping with others, praying for others, hurting with others, serving others, being involved in the lives of others. Why is it that we meet every week together? Because it's better together. And it doesn't mean that we're perfect at it, and it means that we're going to make mistakes. But when we are together, there's a community that is found that's unlike anywhere else. Spur one another on in love for God, love for others, and good deeds. Don't give up meeting together. And then the last dish that the writer serves up says, encouraging one another. Encouraging one another. You see, when it comes to the church, someplace along the way, we got into this idea that, well, if we hire someone, they're going to do the Christian stuff at church. They're going to be the encourager and the preacher and all that. And I just get to show up and then leave. That was long before me. But when you look at the church in the New Testament, it is this mutual ministry. It's not just one person or a couple people. It is everybody doing their part. I mean, the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, it talks about the body, and each party does what it is supposed to do. You see, we as the church, we encourage one another. There's this one another togetherness that is not found anywhere else. It's a mutual encouragement. For these people that are receiving this letter in the book of Hebrews, they are experiencing rejection from their family. The people that are the very closest people to them are rejecting them and saying, we don't want any part of you because of your faith. Some of you know what that's like, which means that you also know how important encouragement is in the middle of that trial. You see, without encouragement, it's much easier to walk away. Without encouragement from one another, it's easy to focus on us instead of others. Without encouragement, it's easy to make church all about ourselves and what we get and what we don't get if we're never worried about pouring into others. A lot of times we think of, I need to go to church today for me. And that's very true. We all need to be here for us. But what if because of the unique community that we're a part of, what if we reframe that question? And instead of, I need to go to church for me, our thought became, who needs for me to be there? Who needs for me to be there? Not because any of us are like the be-all, end-all of Christianity, like, I'm coming to church today, so everyone's going to be better. You know, it's not one of those things. But who is it that needs me to be there? Who is it at our church that needs to hear me be an encourager this week? Who is it this week that can't sing the songs that we're singing in worship because their faith is so weak that I need to stand next to and sing extra loud so they can stand on my faith because theirs is weak right now? Who is it that at our church that needs to see me serving this week selflessly to be reminded of that's why we serve? Instead of I need to go to church for me, what if our mentality, because of the unique community that we have, was who needs for my faith to be there? To be an encouragement. Encouraging one another. Spur one another on in love and good deeds. Don't give up meeting together and encourage one another selflessly. It's this feast of community. Friends, our truth for this morning is that community is the feast of faithfulness. Why is it that generations that come before many of us, why is it they attended every week? Nothing got planned on Sunday morning. We were not going to miss. And no, it's not a drag everybody to, but it's a recognition of we can't miss out on this community. Because in the trials and the difficulty in life, community is the feast of faithfulness. It's what fills us up. It's what gets us through. Community is the feast of faithfulness. This morning, how hungry are you? Have you focused for a long time on the me and he relationship and forgot about the we? Has the we let you down somewhere? And so you started giving up on it. Have we made our time about us? You see, if community is the feast of faithfulness, then we get together, even if the sermon is no good and the worship stinks, our time together should be excellent. Because we have one another. How hungry are you? Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Christian in a concentration camp in World War II. And he writes different times about the difficulty that he went through in that process. But here's what he wrote in one of his books, Life Together. And friends, hear these words. The more genuine and deeper our community becomes, the more will everything else between us recede. The more clearly and purely will Jesus and his work become the one and only thing that is vital between us. I want to read that again. The more genuine and deeper our community becomes, the more will everything else between us recede. The more clearly and purely will Jesus Christ and his work become the one and only thing that is vital between us. There's a lot of different ways that we could divide, but there's only one that brings us all together. And he's the one going all the way back to where we started. Because of Jesus. Because of Jesus, we spur one another on. We encourage, we agitate one another closer to Jesus. Because of Jesus, we don't give up meeting together, because there's this unique community of people that comes together every week to chase after him, after all the different aspects of culture around us. We encourage one another to not give up and to hold on. Because the community that we have around Jesus, it is the feast, it is key, it is vital to our faithfulness over time. Community is the feast of faithfulness. How hungry are you? When I was a youth minister in Joplin before moving up here, we took our students, our high school students, to a CIY summer conference. And one of the days they talked about encouragement and being the church and what that looked like. And so the guy got done preaching, and there was several different songs of worship. And we were sitting, like, we were a smaller church, smaller youth group. We had one row, not even, but there was a big church from Joplin sitting right in front of us. And they had like 3 rows of all of these students. And so the sermon was all about being the church, encouraging, everything like that. And so as the band is playing, there's 2 or 3 songs that they're singing. And I'm standing there singing, and all of a sudden I notice someone in this group, they hop up and they go over to someone else in the group, and they kind of put their arm around them. And I'm like, oh, that's nice, and just kept singing. And then I see someone else in the group, they pop up and they walk all the way around to the other side of the group, and they kind of tap someone on the shoulder and they speak directly into them. And I was like, oh man, that's kind of neat. And then I see it was like kind of popcorn, and it just started happening more and more. And if I'm real honest, my first reaction was, what are all these kids doing? Like, pay attention, we're singing right now. Like, real honest, like that was my first reaction. But then I watched a little bit more of what was taking place. And what I realized is that in this group of high school students standing right in front of me, the church was unfolding. Because I watched as these high school kids, they went over to other people in their youth group and just put their arm around them and worship next to them. Because they knew that they needed it. And I watched as other high schoolers, they went over and they found 2 or 3 people in their group, and they just started to pray for them right there. Because they knew that they needed it. I watched groups huddle up and just be an encouragement to one another. And maybe my favorite part of all of this was that the adults just watched too. It was the church just unfolding and living out this feast that we just talked about, of encouraging one another, of spurring one another on, of not missing the opportunity of time together and community with one another. The church was unfolding right before me. And it was all because of Jesus. And There's a lot of reasons every week when we meet together for us not to interact with others around the room. They're older or younger. They do things different. They worship different. They communicate different. There's lots of different reasons. But we all meet in this room and meet together because of Jesus. And because of Jesus, we encourage one another. And because of Jesus, we don't miss this opportunity to be together. And because of Jesus and what he did on the cross for us, he calls us into action, and we bring others into action with us. To where our focus is not about us, but about one another. Because the community that we have, it is our feast for faithfulness for the long haul. This morning, how hungry are you? Are you spending time intentionally encouraging other people around Crossroads? Are you spending time spurring one another on? Hey, we've got this place to serve. I'd love for you to come serve with me. Hey, I've noticed you haven't been here in a couple weeks. I've noticed you haven't been here in a month. We miss you. I've got a seat saved right next to me for you next week. Hey, I know life's really hard right now. How can I pray for you right now? I know in the difficulty of this moment, it's hard for you to hang on to God. So I'm going to pray for you, and you just hold on to me. Community is the feast of our faithfulness. This morning, are we encouraging? Are we spurring? Are we prioritizing? Because the community that we have is a feast for the faithfulness of God for eternity. Let's go ahead and stand together. We're going to worship together. And even though we all come from different places, and even though we're from different generations all across the board, no matter how old or young we are, we have something in common, and it's that Jesus has scripted life into us. He's made us his children through the blood of the cross. And so this morning as we worship, even how different we all are, there is a unique quality among all of us in that we're children of God. We've been rescued, we've been redeemed, we've been given hope through him. And that maybe as we worship this morning, you're thinking to yourself, Matt, I'm a 4 for 4. I don't know this 1.7 business. I'm here every week. And if that's you, thank you. Glad you're here. But we probably don't have to look too far down our family line or our friend line to see 1.7, do we? And so maybe this morning as we worship, as we recognize this is who God has made me to be, I want to plead and pray to God for them. Maybe this morning as we worship, you know that there's someone else in this room that's going through trials and difficulties. You know that right now life's not easy. And maybe this morning as we worship, you find them and you pray for them right now. Maybe there's someone else around the room that you look and you say, you know what, I just want to go encourage them. I think they're doing great. And maybe as we worship, you just walk over and say, this is what I see in you. This is how I see God working in your life. This is the value that you have. You see, the community that we have with one another, friends, it's unique, and it's unique for a reason. It's unique because of Jesus, and no other place has that. And so let us live in that community. Let us cherish that community. And let us hold on to that community to find faithfulness for eternity.